Thanks everybody for coming out. Second day of Develop. And so this is a collab talk that Michael and I decided to put together. Part of it was inspired by some work that I'm doing on my current job. I don't know what made you do this.
I like Morgan, and we both have similar concepts about how devs and designers need to work together, and everybody gets smarter in the process.
Exactly.
So hopefully you're going to learn how to be a unicorn today. We'll jump right in. Boop. Oh, a little bit about us.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Who are you?
Who am I? My name is Morgan Whaley. I am a senior UI prototype architect at Charter Communications in the Tech Center. I have 11 years of print, interactive, and user experience design background, and 7 years coding background. So I'm bringing primarily the code-centric side of this talk. Who are you?
So I'm Michael Dusing. I'm a product designer. I have 12 years of design experience and 6 years of coding experience. So I'm bringing primarily the design aspect to this talk.
Nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to take you all on a magical journey of learning how to become a unicorn in this facet. And so I think the first thing we can talk about actually is what a unicorn is.
Yes.
Most people, I think, know, at least conceptually, that it's a horse with a horn. But when it comes to this industry, it's also someone who can wear a lot of these different hats of design and code and actually be able to do both fairly effectively and with the business sense in mind to do both and do it well, either in your organization, with side hustles, whatever it is. Does that sound accurate to you?
Yes, sounds very accurate. And some people think a unicorn is a mythical thing. It is possible to have more than one skill. You don't have to be just a designer or just a developer. You don't need to be amazingly awesome at everything, but having diverse skills makes you more valuable to everyone.
Yeah, and the thing I'll add to that is that companies actually do tend to appreciate when people learn new skills. I used to be of the mindset that I had to be very, very good in one specific area and that I wasn't allowed to deviate from that particular set of skills. And so when I was a designer, I didn't really code, and then I got into coding and I just coded and I let the designers do their jobs because I was afraid of either stepping on somebody's toes or undermining somebody else's skill set. And it's only been in the past maybe 3 years of my career that I've done a lot more learning and cross-training through work and learning on the side about user experience design and getting back into that facet of interactive design work. And I've realized that both companies and people actually appreciate when somebody takes the time to learn something different. And then I thought about my own situation, and if a designer ever comes to me and says, hey, can I sit in on a code review, or can I just sit with you and watch the stuff you're doing? I'm always like, yeah, man, you can watch me flounder for 5 hours on how to change this variable, and then you can see what we go through. And then I would ask them the same, can I sit in on design critiques? Can I learn more about what you do? And no one ever said, nah, get the fuck out of here. You can't do that.
So yeah, hopefully you guys as a designer will learn a little bit about like different frameworks. There's all these things that code people talk about, all this jargon they use and acronyms and things, and you're like, what's going on? Like people talking about like NPM. What the hell is NPM and why do I need to use it?
That's a good question.
Can you tell me?
I can. NPM stands for Node Package Manager. A lot of people talk about NPM on the coding side because it's basically the way that we import libraries to use for either single-page applications or complex projects. It's also a glorious pain in the ass sometimes and can spend sometimes half a day trying to untangle what NPM does or why it's being fucky.
So like using NPM and even basic like CSS structure in the design world is basically like the same thing as having your design system with your components and your like library of icons that you're using from material or whatever. It's very similar mindset and very similar like packages of things that you need to use that all come together to make your product. Same stuff on the design side, same stuff on the dev side, different names, different acronyms, and you can easily demystify those things if you just ask the question of like, hey, why are you using NPM for this? What code library are you using? Like, how does that CSS structure work? Like, look at your global styles and how do we set this up so we can use it across everything as opposed to using it on one specific page. And there's a lot of different concepts there. So like you can use CSS styles specifically on a page if you want to override things. That's how you get your designer tweaks on things. When you're like, hey man, that line is like 1 point and it should be 2 points. Like, fix that for me. You can fix it yourself. Knowing CSS so you can tweak stuff and help the team get things done and really get it to a finished polished state can be a huge, huge advantage.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I work on a prototyping team, and so my group builds high-fidelity prototypes in Vue.js to allow our designers and our research team to either put things in front of customers to vet the viability. We also do a lot of R&D and test technical feasibility, and the thing that I've found, especially in my organization now, is that our designers understanding CSS, HTML, and the technical limitations that are presented by code has allowed them to build their own prototypes. And this could be in Flinto or Framer or Proto.io. But to understand that, and then also for us to be able to sit down together and for me to go, hey, I think we want to test this concept. Can I mock something up together for you real quick? And sometimes they'll go like, oh, I'd actually love to do that myself. And I'm like, that's awesome. You should totally go do that. So learning a lot of these too really adds to design effectiveness because you can vet a concept really quickly by either building a rapid prototype, either in a tool or even just throwing it into a browser and seeing what it looks like. Because what something looks like in Sketch may not be a complete mirrored real-world situation of what it looks like in Chrome or on a phone, and then you can see where breakpoints happen as things are put into different formats, different layouts, and it really pulls you out of that silo of the process too. And I love seeing that happen when I work with designers who are vetting something, whether it's a design concept or a complex user flow, or even trying to inject something different into an existing application, and they don't quite know how it's going to work or how they want it to behave. The other part of that is if I work with a designer who can come to me and we can talk about CSS together or how we want transitions to happen, then I can make their work come to life that much more effectively. I'm not just going to go, cool, so you load the navigation and then you click on it, it turns blue and it takes you to the thing and it does the thing, and then we all get to go home and we ride our segways off into the sunset. Instead, I get to go, cool, let's do like this easing, and we're going to have this fade in, and then when someone clicks here, we're going to have it slide over, and then we're going to have a transition come in here, and it allows for both of us, or all of us if I'm working with a team, to create a fuller realization of that design.
Well, and for the designer, you're able to sit down with the developer and be like, hey, I had this really cool idea for this animation where this thing flies in and then it goes pop, and like really makes you feel like you clicked on that one thing. Like sitting down and being able to collaborate on that and not having to figure out like, oh crap, how do I use something to make this look the way I want so that I can just hand it over and be like, make this. It's not about make this. It's about working together to make an idea and a thing that you're both invested in and that betters your product. Part of that too, you talked a little bit real briefly about framework stuff. So, I mean, some of the popular frameworks are like React and Angular and Vue. Just as a designer, knowing like the advantages and disadvantages to some of those frameworks, like, hey, our app is a Vue app. Let me learn a little bit about base level about what Vue is and why people use it and what the advantages and disadvantages are for that. Then you can speak intelligently when you're sitting in on a code review and be like, oh, hey, I read this one thing. How are we handling that? Like, it's a big, just having that base level makes you look so much smarter as a designer. And part of that is having a bag of tricks. So you can be a designer with your little trick-or-treat pail. It's Halloween time. Riding your bike, pulling out your bag of tricks. So there's lots of different ways to learn these things and get educated. One of them is to just dive in and start doing CSS and HTML on things, tweaking things. That can be on your personal website, that can be on your product. Like Morgan was saying, hey, let's build a prototype of this one little thing. That's an opportunity for you to get in and not have to go crazy deep. You're just trying to do one thing, code it together, sit down with a developer and say like, okay, how do I get set up to get started here? There's also the ever wonderful Stack Overflow, where you can be like, hey, this variable isn't doing the thing that the tutorial I used says it does. How do I get that to work? Stack Overflow is a great place to ask questions, or chances are somebody has asked the exact question that you are looking for already, and you just need to Google it. How much coding is Googling?
Like the Google itself?
The Googles, does it answer all your questions?
Pretty close to it, yes.
Chances are you're not the first person to try and do that. And if you are, everyone will help you figure it out.
And if you figure it out, fucking post it online so the next poor sap
Bingo.
can also figure it out.
Yes, so the next poor sap isn't like, oh, they asked the same question I did a year ago. Did they ever figure it out, or did they just give up?
Totally.
There's other resources out there. I mean, base level CSS stuff. There's w3schools.com, which basically has a breakdown of different CSS variables and what they do. They also have code examples that you can try out and change things and be like, oh, okay, now I understand like how that works and how I should use it. Yes. What about architecture and making things look cool?
Yeah, and also to add on to what you said, the other thing that I recommend people to do, and this is something that I do if I need to learn something new, I'll find a tutorial like you were talking about, and I will have two browsers open. Ideally on two monitors so I look really like I know what I'm doing. And in one, I'll be going through the tutorial and I'll be doing my code and setting up a project. In the other one, I'm Googling what is actually going on through every step of the tutorial, because tutorials tend to stay high level. They're like, type this,
Yep.
now type this, now type this. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah, why
is
am
it
I doing
literally
this?
just magic? Exactly. And it's not literally just magic. There is magic happening behind the scenes as to why your database can now talk to your front end, or why your styles are not overriding. And I find that Googling every step of the way and going like, hey, if I'm installing Mongoose to talk to MongoDB, what the fuck is Mongoose other than a thing that kills snakes? What is it? Why is it important? How can I understand this? I recently worked on a project with a coworker, and he said, hey, well, I really want to get the core architecture set up. This is my segue into architecture. And I don't understand this thing. And I was like, okay, well, we need to pry into this a little bit and start to pick it apart, because I want to understand what's going on behind the scenes so that I can find the errors better and set it up better. And so we spent like 45 minutes to an hour just picking apart this error to not only understand how to fix it, but what was going on that caused the error and how to mitigate that in the future. And then we captured that in a note so that we knew for in the future, or if we passed the project off to somebody else, that they weren't just going to be stuck with it. So yeah, basically, I think it's good for building that high-level comprehension. And when it comes to things like the architecture versus making shit look cool, I had a note on this. I wrote a note.
With the architecture thing,
Yes.
a big thing like coming from the UX end of things is you figure out the information architecture of your app and your database and how things work together. To be able to explain that and sit down and talk to a developer about like, hey, here's our different pieces and here's how they work together for the user, can also inform the design of the database and the architecture.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, both parties are trying to solve a problem, and people are doing it with visuals or flows or affinity mapping, or people are doing it with code.
Hopefully it's the same problem that you're trying to solve together.
God, let's hope so. It's not always the case, but in our perfect world, we're going to say that we're solving the same problem and that both people know what that problem is.
Yes.
But yeah, so there is a separate set of considerations. There's the add the glossiness, make stuff look amazing, but if you're not delivering business value and talking to the coders and really understanding what's going on, then it'll usually just kind of fizzle. And this is why when people ask me, and this goes for like junior devs, this goes for designers, this goes for a lot of people, they go like, what framework should I learn? And so Michael wrapped off a bunch of those, and it's important, like he said, to understand the limitations and kind of how they work, but I don't expect anyone to be an expert in React or to really understand the intrinsic inner workings of how Vue builds out its components and how RxJS uses observables. That is like a little bit out of scope.
I mean, it's like when Morgan comes to me and says, which design tool should I use? Should I use XD or Sketch or InVision Studio? And you're like, well, they all have their advantages and disadvantages. It's the same sort of thing, knowing a little bit about why people use each one. I mean, even like the new Framer stuff, and being able to show like, hey, Morgan, check this out. Framer X came out and it does these amazing things. Like educating each other is a big part of this.
Totally. And then I think too, it's like trying to sell each other, because I could be like, cool, Framer X, why should I care?
Yes, exactly. And like you talked about the business value. So you as a UXer can help devs and take their ideas and help them add business value to it, and vice versa as well. So when you're like, hey, I had this amazing idea and I think it's going to make a difference for our business, can you help me build a prototype?
Yep, totally.
Show the business that we know what we're talking about.
Yes. And one thing that I think is good is sometimes it doesn't involve just jumping straight into the code.
Yes.
I love to just get in front of a whiteboard with people and work through a problem like that. I was talking to my boss the other day, and he said, one thing I like to do with people is I tell them, how do you design an elevator? And think about all the considerations of building like a 4-bank elevator system. And it's like, what kind of inputs do you need from people? And instead of typing out variables and functions and worrying about getting in the trenches on that kind of stuff, to stay high level and just think through a problem from this like step-by-step approach. And that's neither here nor there, whether it's programming or design. It's just thinking through an issue and saying like, okay, cool, so somebody's got to walk up and press a button, so we need a button. And then we need that button to send a signal to some kind of elevator system. And then it's going to check and see where all the elevators are. Is this person going up or down, et cetera, et cetera. And then pretty soon, that's essentially just writing pseudocode. And you can do this anytime with any kind of problem and basically say, all right, well, from the pseudocode, then you're essentially building a flow chart of inputs and outputs and what's going on. And then from there, you're building your interfaces, and then you're building your trackers, and then you're building how your data flows through. And so something that seems super daunting can actually be broken down into something very achievable once you take away the implementation specifics and just think about it holistically as a problem that humans experience, which is the way I think about design anyway, and coding, that it's all just about solving a problem for the user, for the customer, for my friend, for myself, whoever it is.
I mean, it's the same thing from UX, your elevator analogy. It's like, okay, we have someone who walks into this building and they need to get to this business on the 6th floor. Like, how do we solve that problem and what happens in between? And it's a big thing as a UXer not to just do that stuff by yourself, but explain the why and the decisions that you've made each step of the way to your developers and work together. I mean, like you're saying with the whiteboard, I often do that with teams where we're like, okay, this is our core problem for this feature. How do we figure out point A to point B? And here's 5 solutions that we came up with together. Let's figure out which one works best and which one has the least amount of business debt and things like that to sell this. So this is why we should do this now. This is how we can do it, and this is how we're going to save the business money because of it. So not everything is rainbows and sunshine. Sometimes there's monsters on your path, like this creepy, creepy man.
With this creepy, creepy doll.
So yeah, sometimes the divide between us is filled with tension, and you're not always just buddy-buddy with your developer friends.
We've never actually had to work together. That's why we can hug.
I was gonna say, I think that's the reason why we respect each other. We're like,
Yeah.
yeah, do what she says, because I've never had a bad conversation.
Exactly.
So sometimes there's tension between teams. How do you handle that, Morgan?
I embrace it, actually. I am cool with tension. So in my daily life, I tend to be the peacemaker. I am the accommodating person who will bend over backwards because somebody else is uncomfortable. I do that in my life. I don't do it at work. Work is a totally different ball game. I walk through the doors of my office and I'm just like, fucking game face, like, I think a healthy tension between teams is actually a good thing from a high level, and it's something that should actually be embraced. If I had absolute control over my universe and I was only handed very achievable, very easy to implement designs by my UX designers, I probably wouldn't be challenged very much in my job.
Agreed, and vice versa. I mean, part of the point is that you're pushing each other and you're learning things and doing new things. If you're just taking the material library that Morgan gave you and using those components on the page and done, like, why are you there? And AI could do that. The whole goal is to make the business better, make the product better, and push things forward. So you're there to say, as a UX designer, my job is to advocate for the user. Like, this is what the user wants to do, and this is how we can make it simple for them. And Morgan might be like, well, that's stupid. We should use these libraries and just do it this way because it's a lot less code. And you're like, no, we need to do it this way because that's what our user wants and is expecting, and how we provide that value to them in the best way possible. So there can be some tension. You got to know when to tread to that line and when to give up on certain things. Pick your battles. You're not going to win them all because Morgan might be on the other side of the fence winning everything. But the goal is to not battle all the time and have a mutual respect for each other, because the more you can work together, the more everybody's happy, and you don't come to work being like, oh God, I got another meeting today with Morgan and she's just gonna shoot down all my ideas.
Oh, I can't wait till we work together so you can think that. It's gonna be amazing. I'd say to expand on that, I like when my coworkers make me better, and I like making my coworkers better. And so when I am faced with a problem, it's really easy to say, oh, well, that's too hard, and I'm just gonna push back, either because it means that I'm going to have to extra focus and spend less time on Denver Dev Slack for this particular sprint, or eat lunch at my desk, or think really, really hard, which is incredibly painful. And instead,
You have to use your brain at work?
fuck, dude, I try not to. They don't pay me to think. Wait, they do. Oh man, they're gonna find out. Yeah, so instead of looking at a design, let's say that the team is working on some huge complicated rollout and we're going to be injecting brand new flows and brand new interactions into an existing system. This is one of the most complicated things that a developer can get. Building stuff from the ground up, not that hard. Adding a wing to an existing house, total pain in the ass. But if everything was just made easy for me, then I wouldn't grow as a programmer. And then I also wouldn't know how to collaborate with my designers and be like, hey, look, I want to know what kind of trade-offs we can talk about. Let's have a hostage negotiation.
Yeah,
and
know what each
discuss
other's
this.
challenges are. So, like, as a designer, you're up against certain challenges. There are challenges that you don't know exist for developers, and a lot of them have to do with technical debt of adding something new onto a framework and things that already exist. I mean, it might be as simple as like, hey, we're designing a new reporting system and we're changing the date format. And Morgan's like, oh God, the thing we use for dates is just not gonna work with this, and I'm gonna have to rip it out from everything and put in something new, and it's gonna be the bane of my existence for the next 3 weeks.
Totally. And there are two words that can solve a lot of this friction in a good way. Show me.
Yes.
I want to see, just like I want to see a designer's solution paradigm, I'm okay with someone sitting with me so that I can give them a high-level overview of the core architecture of a project so that I can show specifically either how complicated or sometimes how frighteningly easy it is to do something. I've also had the opposite conversation. Some people come up to me and be like, hey, I think this is going to be a little complex, but I want to know what you think. And I look at their sketch file or I look at Zeppelin and I go, I can do that in 5 minutes, but don't tell anybody else that.
Yes, exactly. There's definitely those conversations where you sit down with the developer and you're like, why are we doing this? Why are we using this? We imported this library, did this one thing. Why are we doing that? And they're like, I don't know. It was a decision we made a year ago, and I have no idea why, and now we're paying for it. And there's the same thing with design. It's like, okay, you designed this really complicated transition in this component that doesn't really exist, and I have to merge 3 components into one, and it's just a cluster. Like, why are we doing that? Okay, let me explain what my thought process was there, and you're like, but what if we separate this one thing and do this? Okay, now it just became incredibly easier to implement. Like, it's all about the give and take and the hostage negotiations.
Yes.
Sometimes Barbie has a horn, and you just need to look her in the eye and say, this is what we're going to do together.
Yep, totally.
So, it's not all monsters along the path. There are allies.
Totally. So outside of designers and devs collaborating together, because we've hit on that pretty hard, in addition to that is figuring out how the company can support this process. So this can be done through inviting people. I invite designers to code reviews. I have asked to be invited to design sprints because I want to see a process. I've helped train teams on lean process implementation for groups where they want developers and designers to go fully embedded with one another. Yep. These are things that companies are doing. I work for a Fortune 70 company with 100,000 people, and they're going lean. This is not for startups anymore. Yep. This is for rapid iteration on enterprise products that are seen by millions of people. I work for a telecom company. You know how pissed off people get when their TV interface changes and they live in like Nebraska and they're 76 years old? They get pissed.
So
people
this is
don't like the world invaded.
There's this concept that's existed for designers and for developers that we've never really crossed with each other. It's very commonplace for a junior or mid-level designer to work with a senior and pair and figure things out and solve problems together. It's very commonplace for developers that are mid or senior to pair with a junior and show them how to do stuff and review each other's code. We both do this all the time, but we don't do it with each other as much as we should. Sit down next to a developer as a designer and say, hey, here's the design on this page. Can you show me the code for that and how we're doing things? Or I want to tweak this one thing. Can we tweak it together? Lots of times when you're doing small things, as a designer, you can sit down as the one at the keyboard doing the code and have a developer sitting next to you, but do the thing. If you do it, you will remember and you will learn so much more. And vice versa. When you have a developer who's design curious or wants to know about UX flows, show them how Envision prototyping works or Framer or things like that. Show them how you made an animation or how you want an animation to work and how you tweak it. Let them get their hands dirty with some of that if they want to. Do you use Sketch at all?
I open files in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
and
great.
I open CSS files in coding programs and look at the structure and put comments in them why are you doing this?
Yes.
This is not smart.
Oh, and one
Overriding
thing.
the override to override.
Fuck yeah, man. Important.
Important, yeah. How many importance can we get on this CSS?
Well, and that's one thing that I love to tell people to do is my group, we deploy all of our stuff to staging servers. Most companies, applications get deployed to some kind of staging. It might be behind an SSO login for your org, but they are out there. Find out where they are, open them in Chrome and just fuck with them inside of the inspector. I've gone in and I'll inject JavaScript code, I'll fix styles to do different stuff, I'll change the text. That's a super fast way to learn kind of what's going on with a process outside of looking at the CSS that Zeppelin generates for a particular component. Because I know there are a lot of these tools out there that do a lot of cool shit that give you some context. I pull a lot of styles out of Zeppelin a lot of the time. I grab my colors, I grab border radiuses, distances between stuff. It's pretty freaking awesome that it's doing this kind of like lighter lifting for me so that I can focus on the more complicated interactions. And I have a program now who can just kind of feed me all this stuff and make my life a little bit easier. But having said that, I don't like doing it in a vacuum. I want other designers and other people to see that process. And also to see how I make those decisions. Like okay, how does SaaS work? Who the fuck knows? But the whole point, is that I'm not just gonna like blindly pull styles out of Zeppelin and stick them in a style sheet and do important everywhere. It all has to go into the ecosystem of, if you have an existing design system, where do you pull that in and where do you override stuff for that? Or if you're using Google Material or Bootstrap or is jQuery UI still a thing? No, totally not.
And how you, as a designer, take that design system and integrate it into the CSS. What are the global things that you need to do? Like, anytime we have a corner radius, it's going to be 4 or 8. Like, what are the design systems that you're using? Like, is it structured around like 8 and 16, and everything's like 8, 16, 32, things like that? Like, so she knows like, oh, the spacing is generally like 16 pixels between all this stuff. She doesn't even need to go to Zeppelin and check it every time. And she can understand why I did what I did. You know, like, there's different button styles, there's a primary and a secondary, and this is when we should use each one and the rules behind it. So that she doesn't need to look at your design specifically for everything. And as we all know, Photoshop and Sketch and other things like to change your increments from an awesome round fun numbers into fractions and 1 pixel off of what you had, and then you get really pissed when it's 17 instead of 16. If everybody's on the same page with like what you're trying to accomplish, it doesn't matter if your pixel perfect comp is there. And really, pixel perfection is never the goal. The goal is to get things moving forward and work together. So if she knows, like, we're working off a 16-point grid, things are like 8, 16, 24, 32, stuff like that, then she doesn't even have to ask. If something's like 22 instead of 24, she'll just make it 24. And everyone was happy. And you don't have to be like, oh, this is 2 pixels off. We've got to fix that.
Exactly. The other thing that I like to tell people to do is build your magical allies. Like Finn and Jake have always been a thing, but now they're riding a unicorn together. So how does that work? One thing I encourage people to do is build some kind of fun project together. We have an accessibility team at my office, and my office also has a 90-10 policy. So Google has 80-20, which their whole idea is spend 1 day a week doing something that adds business value, some kind of like internal skunk works. This is actually how like Amazon Prime started, was like an 80-10 or an 80-20 math project. The downfall of Google is it sometimes turns into 100-20, not 80-20, and so a lot of people will spend an awful lot of spare time on that side project. But at my office, 90-10, that works out to about 6 hours a week that I can spend working on something different that either vets a new idea, adds skill sets, or is just something cool. And so I'm working with people on our accessibility team to build a fully accessible mobile application for blind people to learn how to cook. And so we're digging into some interesting stuff like concurrent timers, text-to-speech, all of these different cool parts of technology as well as accessible technology. And I'm having almost everyone else do all the coding, and I'm there as almost like a project manager to herd the cats, walk them through the design thinking process, walk them through how to look up the architecture, how to set it up, and then how to delegate the work among everyone based on their skill set and how to grow them quicker. So you can build these alliances, and you can do it cross teams, is the other thing. Like, you don't have to just work with your group or your client or whoever to do this. This is something where none of the people I'm working with right now are on my immediate team. These are people from other parts of the organization, so I get to know how the accessibility team works. What are they up against? They get to learn what my group is up against and what I'm up against as a person. And that's made a huge difference, and they're learning a lot of cool stuff super fast, and then I'm learning a ton about accessibility technology and how that affects both design, user experience, and programming.
And a big part of building allies is helping other people accomplish their ideas. So like when Morgan comes to me and says, hey, I had this idea for this thing, I'm not sure how to sell it or how to make it work, can you help me with it? By helping them surface their idea and make it valid and sell it, you can really build an ally and show that you have mutual respect for each other. That's ultimately what it's about. It's like we're all here to do good things and build things. We're not here to fight with each other every day.
Not every day, just weekly.
Just once a week.
Yeah.
Once a week. A big thing too in building allies is like get out of the office together, even if it's just like to grab a drink after work or to grab lunch. Once a month, grab lunch with somebody that you're co-working with, and learn about like their life outside of the office a little bit. You are human beings. You are not robots. And you're not just doing one thing. So Morgan maybe went hiking this weekend and
Totally did.
checked out a new path. Learn about it. Inevitably, people will respect you more if you show an interest in them. So, cyclists. So.
Yay. Thank you all. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Morgan.
Yay.
Hug it out.
One more.